Honestly, I have very mixed feelings towards Season 3 of Chapter 4, mainly because I do think this season has a lot of entertaining and overall good aspects that make me want to say that it's a good season. However, the latter half of this season in particular has kind of made it hard for me to still say that this was a good season. I want to explain why I think this season is not a great season and overall follows common trends that make this game unplayable for most people, including myself. And as per usual, I rank these seasons based off of three main categories: map changes, loot pool, and overall content / quality of life changes. The map changes this season were overall very solid, with most of them adding new locations in previously barren areas. We usually do see a new POI remove one from a prior season. However, I don't really understand the choice being Anvil Square. Oftentimes you'll see a POI get revamped or removed during a season because it wasn't necessarily a great location to begin with. For example, Chapter 1 Season 5 had an addition of the desert area.
Take a look, there's a Diplodocus!
Which removed the swamp biome, and it replaced Moisty Mires with a significantly better location, Paradise Palms, and the decision to revamp the racetrack Gus made it a significantly better location to land. However, here they decided to remove Anvil and replace it with a location that is arguably worse. The location I'm referring to is Creaky Compound, and while I think Creaky Compound is still a great POI, there were other areas of the map that they could have placed it without having to affect Anvil. Creaky Compound does, however, have a good layout, with my only real gripe about the POI other than the fact that it removed a pre-existing one being the fact that the pallets at this location for whatever reason only give you anywhere from 5 to 10 total wood when farming them. You'll notice this kind of thing often where Epic decides to make some random structures, trees, or rocks give you not as much material for being something that takes just as long to farm as everything else. It's like if I wanted to play a mode where there was reduced building, I would definitely not be playing the regular Battle Royale playlist, but rather something like no builds.
Build! Crank!
I knocked one.
Regardless of this, out of these three POIs, I would say that Shady Stilts is the best. This is because out of the 3 new locations that they added, it seems to have the highest density of loot. And while I was very negative towards Creaky Compound, I think the worst of the 3 is Rumble Ruins. For whatever reason, this POI's loot is very spread apart, and while it has more loot than Creaky Compound, the problem with this location is that it's just way too open. I could understand this if it had multiple sections that were dense with loot. However, each section, other than the main building, has anywhere from 1 to 3 chests total, making it very difficult to land anywhere other than the far center building. The nice thing about this POI when compared to the others is that it takes up an area of the map that prior to this season had no loot, so I really can't complain about having more loot on the map. However, I think this POI just definitely could have been executed better. Overall, these 3 new additions to the map are pretty good and definitely the best aspect of this season. With the new biome came some extra rotation like mud, which allowed you to slide faster, vines, different mushrooms or plants in the forms of bounce pads, as well as zip lines, which I'm always happy to see. The loot pool this season pretty much got worse every single update. With the launch of the season, they introduced the Cybertron cannon, which at the beginning of the season was annoying to play with because it was another item that essentially could destroy a good amount of your builds very easily. This weapon was mainly used for spamming because it would recharge over time, giving it infinite uses. However, this weapon was quickly dominated by the repeater rifle, which was added in the next update, 25.11. This weapon is similar to the Cybertron cannon because it dealt explosive damage and could break builds fairly quickly. A good number of people were running this weapon and tried to double pump with it, which definitely worked as a good strategy considering you could get an easy 40 plus damage with this weapon by simply hitting someone for splash damage up close and then switching to your Havoc directly after, acting kind of like a double pump strategy. Of course, this meant that a lot of people were going to say that double pumping was back simply because this thing kind of looked like the pump and you could technically use it like you were double pumping. However, even this weapon pretty quickly got stepped on by the addition of the Mammoth Pistol, which is probably one of the most broken weapons that they've added into the game in a while. This weapon, when originally added, did anywhere from 80 to 90 damage to the body and around 180 to 190 with little to no fall off.
Oh my god, I knocked him! Oh my god. I finished.
In the most recent update, they have nerfed the headshot multiplier for this weapon. However, it's still a very powerful weapon because it's essentially just a juiced up deagle and is probably the highest damage hit scan weapon ever added into the game. The only real gimmick to this weapon was the fact that it had to reload after one shot, which wasn't a really big deal considering it didn't take very long as it is to reload, and there were about 5 different augments in this season that all made using this weapon way better, including one that had the chance to not consume ammo, which basically meant that you wouldn't have to reload it. At this point, I was already annoyed because they had added multiple weapons into the game that all had features that made them busted, and yet they somehow made the loot pool even worse yet again with the last update of this season, 25.3. to preface this by saying that I've never been a big fan of the anime weapons. They all offer some kind of broken ability or utility that makes playing the game a chore. I've had a very hard time enjoying these collab updates because of the addition of these broken items, and the Jujutsu Kaisen update is no different. Once again, we have another set of broken collab items that make the game a terrible experience. Up until this update, the season wasn't doing very well with some of the most recent changes. However, the addition of the straw doll technique, which mainly was used for yet again spamming, and more importantly the hollow purple orb, which evaporates builds in your enemy's health doing a staggering 110 damage, put the nail in the coffin for this season.
Oh, I can headshot this guy. No, he moved last second.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
I feel like if they wanted to make the orb at least kind of balanced, they would have made it so that it only did 50 damage and could only evaporate about 3 layers of structures instead of everything it gets directed at. The problem is I don't see enough people complain about this kind of stuff, so Epic will just continue to add more and more anime collab based items into the game with no repercussions. It's especially annoying because whenever this stuff gets dropped into the season, it pretty much stays until the end of the season, leaving a lasting impact on how I view these different seasons. And honestly, it's unfortunate because other than a few of the other shotgun changes to the loot pool, most of this loot pool is pretty solid. But Epic just continues to add these weapons and items into the game that are just far from balanced. Speaking of shotguns, this season added back the lever and the drum shotguns, which are both terrible and really only serve the purpose of muddying up the loot pool. Other than this, when it comes to the shotguns, the only new one we saw this season was the sharp tooth shotgun, which was essentially just a lower damage and more ranged pump. This weapon wasn't terrible, but considering the green Havoc does more damage to the body than the purple Sharptooth, it's still obviously going to be way worse than the Havoc. The only other major loot pool changes this season was the addition of the MK Alpha, which replaced the Red Eye Assault Rifle and was just a much worse version of the MK7 back from Chapter 3. Apart from this, they added the Flapjack Rifle, which isn't a very ranged AR for some reason, with the only real gimmick to this weapon being that it has a pretty large mag. Competitive this season sucks. This mainly has to do with the fact that once again the loot pool from pubs is the exact same as the loot pool from comp. I can't stress this enough, but the loot pool from comp should never be the same exact loot pool as the one that you're going to see in public lobbies. In the past, Epic has separated the two loot pools of Arena and public lobbies playlists. However, with the new ranked playlist that replaced Arena last season, they've made it so that every change that's made for the casual players affects the competitive loot pool, and every change that's made for the ranked or competitive modes affects the public lobbies loot pool. Honestly, if this were fixed this season and ranked didn't have some of the new weapons this season that I complained about, I probably wouldn't say that this season is too terrible. This change would make it so that if you're a person who wanted to be able to play with the new powerful and fun items, you would have the option to do so in public lobbies. But if you're a person like me who prefer to play with a more balanced loot pool or want a more competitive experience, you would be able to experience that loot pool in the competitive playlists. However, Epic instead believes in this one-size-fits-all solution where they can basically add whatever the hell they want into each mode regardless of how it affects these playlists. When competitive launched midway through season 2 of chapter 4, it launched with the promise that we'd be having new competitive seasons, as they labeled this season Season 0. Since then, they have made minimal adjustments to some of the queue time problems as well as ranking up in general, but they haven't really tackled the big issues such as the loot pool or the lack of siphon, and have doubled down on making some of these changes into tournaments. We still have yet to see a new season or any significant change to the ranked mode, and I'm afraid it's likely to stay that way at least until the next chapter, when they usually make their more impactful changes. My only other real complaint that I've been noticing other than competitive is the fact that there's been a large number of people who have been using the AIs around the map to their advantage by hiring them. This bothers me mainly because there really is no disadvantage to hiring one of these guys. They don't consume any of your resources, they offer support during a fight, and even can often tank damage that might have been dealt to you had they realized that they were actually shooting at an AI and not a real player. And on top of all of this, they don't really cost that much considering gold can cross over from each mode and every match. Honestly, even if they just nerf some of the health on some of these bots, it would be nice because they have as much as 300 or more health for whatever reason. Not a huge complaint, but it's another one of those things that makes engaging in fights in this game nowadays just that much more annoying. I left out a lot of stuff specifically from the loot pool category. There were just a lot of items that just did almost nothing pretty much the entire season. And I didn't really feel it was worth spending a bunch of time talking about these items because really the only thing that they did was add a little bit of content for one day and then pretty much just get immediately forgotten about the next day, only serving the purpose of muddying up the loot pool. I want to say this is another good season because most of the seasons this chapter so far have been really strong in my opinion. However, the problem is Epic has just kind of gone back on a lot of the changes that they've made over the past few years by making comp better, and a lot of the changes that they've just made in general to the loot pool this season are very negative in my opinion. They add these weapons that don't really fit into most playlists, and because of their inability to separate the playlist, stuff like the anime mythics bother me much more than they should. With all that being said, I would say this season is probably a solid 5 out of 10. It's very difficult for me to give this season a higher score than that just because of most of these changes. Let me know what you thought about this season and what you would have personally ranked it out of 10. I'll be making more of these videos as new seasons come out, as well as ranking seasons that we've had in the past because there's a few that I think need to be talked about. So make sure you sub if you don't want to miss any of those. Anyways, thank you for watching and have a great day.